We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, your guest host for Point of View.
Welcome to Point of View. I'm Liberty McArtor. I'm sitting in for Kirby Anderson today, and I am glad to be with you. It's going to be a packed show. Coming up later this hour, we will do an interview highlighting Mental Health Awareness Month. Very important interview with some biblical insight and practical applicable tips, so make sure you listen to that. And then at the top of the next hour, we will interview Jake Weidmann talking about art, faith. So if you are creative or you know somebody who is, make sure to tune into that. It's going to be a wonderful interview. But there is a lot of news to discuss, a lot of news of the day. So I do want to cover some of the headlines. There's a lot of news breaking first thing this morning. You can go follow along at pointofview.net. If there's something that we mentioned, most of the topics that we are going to cover, and of course the websites for our guests today will be listed at pointofview.net under today's show so that you can follow along and read more. But the first news is unfortunately tragic news, and we will get into some more hopeful topics later in the show, but we need to discuss this. 2 young adults who were employees of the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C., were killed last night in what is being investigated as an act of anti-Semitic terror. So I'm going to read kind of some bullet point updates from the Wall Street Journal. Again, this happened overnight. You may have seen the reports first thing this morning. A man who shouted "Free Palestine" fatally shot 2 Israeli embassy staffers near the Capitol Jewish Museum in downtown Washington, D.C., in what law enforcement believe was an act of targeted violence. The suspected gunman, whom I will not name, was pacing outside the Capitol Jewish Museum as attendees were leaving an event celebrating Jewish heritage. He approached 4 people with a handgun and opened fire, leaving a young couple dead. He was arrested. As he was arrested, he chanted "Free Palestine." The FBI is currently investigating. The victims were 26-year-old Sarah Lynn Milgram and her partner, 30-year-old Yaron Lachinsky, who both worked at the Israeli embassy in Washington. And according to their friends and family, Lachinsky had bought an engagement ring for Milgram and was going to propose in Jerusalem next week. So extremely tragic, and we all need to be lifting up their friends and family in prayer, of course. But we know, you know, if you've been listening to Point of View, that we have seen record rates of anti-Semitism, especially in our recent years after the October 7th attack, terrorist attack against Israel. Now, what you might not know, you may have heard of this, but potentially not. In the last day or two before this attack happened, there was a falsehood that was going viral globally against Israel. Basically, it was going viral. It was being repeated by the mainstream media, and it began with a quote from a UN official who on a news program said that 14,000 babies in Gaza would starve to death in the next 48 hours if Gaza did not receive aid. So obviously the war is ongoing. Getting aid to the civilians in Gaza has been an ongoing issue. And let's remember that oftentimes that is the fault of Hamas, who has used human shields. They often use schools and hospitals and civilian neighborhoods as their bases and prevent aid from getting in. So we know that's happening. We know that there are innocent people in the Gaza Strip who are suffering. And so this just, again, when all the mainstream news outlets were reporting it, that 14,000 babies would die within 48 hours. Well, now the UN is saying, actually, that's not exactly correct. It's possible that there will be 14,000 severe cases of malnutrition among Gazan kids over the next year if more aid does not get through soon. So saying that we will see malnutrition go up if we don't get aid in Gaza over the next year is a vastly different claim than saying that because of Israel, 14,000 babies are about to die today or tomorrow. And so I think rightly, many people are calling this out as blood libel. And it's interesting, the last thing that one of the victims, Lachinsky, the young man, posted on Twitter the night before he was killed was actually a post refuting that claim. So I wanted to mention this just so that we are aware and as a reminder that our words do have power. This is more than vandalism on a campus or a rowdy campus protest. This is more than ignorant chants that we see talking about the conflict between Israel and Palestine. This has turned into real violence here in the United States against innocent people for no other fact than they are Jewish and representing Israel. And the Bible says that our words have the power of life and death. Obviously, only the person who carries out the act of violence is directly responsible for their own act. But it reminds me even of some of the news we've seen between the kind of rift going on between President Donald Trump and the president of South Africa. I'm not going to get into all of that. I'm sure we will at Point of View at some point. But hearing about, there's debate on whether there's technically genocide happening in South Africa, and a lot of those claims are disputed. But what's not disputed is that you have a lot of people chanting violent, deadly things about another class of people in South Africa. And if that was happening in the United States, we would rightly be very concerned and calling that out, as we should. And so it's just, anytime something like this happens, people want to say, that the rhetoric's not to blame. This is an outlier. This is an exception to the rule. But we have to remember that while words themselves are not violence, words can, I think, inspire violence. And we need to remember to call that out on our own side as well. So we have to be careful with how we speak. And so, again, we will be following the investigation to see what else is discovered about that case and praying for the family. Another update. We may have to talk about this a little bit more in the next segment because before long we'll go to a break. But the Big Beautiful Tax Bill Act is its official name and passed this morning, and they were up all night debating it in the House. So House Republicans managed to pass it by one vote. Early this morning, I think probably around 7 a.m. local time, I was up and saw the notification at like 6:15. And so there is a lot in this tax bill. It is going to extend and make permanent many of the tax cuts that President Trump implemented in his first term. But there are also a lot of positives in this bill, which is technically a budget reconciliation, including increased child tax credit, so some family-friendly policies, and defunding of Planned Parenthood, which, according to the Hyde Amendment, Planned Parenthood and other abortion facilities are already not supposed to be receiving federal dollars. But as I'll explain here in a moment, and you've probably heard us discuss on Point of View before, there is a workaround, and they have still been receiving just a ton of federal taxpayer dollars. So a lot of good stuff. Is it going to lower the deficit? No. We'll talk about that more after the break, and then again have some great interviews coming up. So check out the articles that we're discussing today at pointofview.net, and don't go anywhere because we'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Christopher Caldwell explains how DEI destroyed itself. He wonders why more Americans haven't risen up in rebellion against the Trump administration's assault on affirmative action. The reason is simple. The American people have seen what happens when civil rights concepts are pushed to the extreme. They didn't like how the idea of diversity, equity, and inclusion were used against them and the country. In his book On the Age of Entitlement, Christopher Caldwell documents how the civil rights movement had significant unintended consequences. One was the establishment of an explicit system of racial preferences. Americans may not have liked the fact that certain races were given preferences over others, but chose not to challenge many of those excesses except in an occasional court case. Then came the summer of 2020. While Americans were locked in their houses during COVID, race-conscious youth engaged over the death of George Floyd in police custody set several U.S. cities on fire. He adds that Americans got a taste of living in the Soviet Union. Your life could be destroyed, your career derailed, if your support for George Floyd was less than total. Even celebrities were not immune. New Orleans Saint quarterback Drew Brees had to apologize for his support of the American flag. OSU football coach Mike Gundry apologized for wearing a T-shirt with the name of a conservative television network on it. Then President Biden took office promising to make DEI hardline. The stage was set for Trump to come into office and issue executive orders against DEI, affirmative action, and other such policies. Politicians and bureaucrats pushed these policies too far, and DEI destroyed itself. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free booklet on a biblical view of Patriot Preachers, go to viewpoints.info/Patriot Preachers. Viewpoints.info/Patriot Preachers. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. It's Liberty McArtor with you today. And so let's talk more about this bill, this budget reconciliation called the Big Beautiful Tax Bill that narrowly passed the House this morning after a night of ongoing debate, passed by 1 point. And there was a lot of pressure, including from the president himself, to pass this bill before the Memorial Day holiday. And the goal is that it will now go to the Senate and pass and get to President Trump's desk by July 4th. Why so much pressure? So much of this bill, which because it is a budget reconciliation, can get through Congress with a simple majority and is immune to the filibuster, so it can really be pushed through quickly. So much of what is in here is a lot of the campaign promises that President Trump made. And so there is a real sense of urgency and pressure for Republicans to pass this as quickly as possible. Also, a lot of the changes that President Trump implemented in his tax reforms in his first administration are set to expire soon. And so this would make those permanent. So there's a lot of incentive for Republicans to get this through as quickly as possible. Now, let's look at some of the things that it includes. I can't go into all of it, and there are, again, a lot of tax changes and, details that I'm sure we will explore more over the next few weeks as we see if this gets through the Senate. But two things I wanted to highlight are, first, the fact that this bill does indeed defund big abortion industry even more. And so this was something that was actually one of the points of contention. There were some Republicans who said we've already defunded Planned Parenthood, we've defunded abortion federally through the Hyde Amendment. Others who were, not wanting to prioritize that, they were wanting to prioritize other things. But pro-life activists really pushed for this. And so the thing is that no, because of the Hyde Amendment, abortion facilities, places that provide abortion like Planned Parenthood cannot use federal taxpayer dollars to apply to the abortion procedure itself. but they can still get federal taxpayer dollars through programs like Medicaid. And so if you are receiving federal money, then as we've discussed before, it can really go wherever you want. It's still supporting the function of that facility, of that organization, which the primary function of Planned Parenthood is to provide abortions. So as a reminder, a report just came out a couple weeks ago from the year 2023 to 2024 from Planned Parenthood, their own report. They actually, in that year, performed a record number of abortions in the U.S., 400,000 more than 400,000 abortions, and used 800 million taxpayer dollars. So this was needed. Additionally, Planned Parenthood has also started rebranding itself a bit as a place that you can, that minors can receive gender transition hormones and treatment, so to speak. And so that is one of the things that they have been providing. So under this bill, the House version, of course, it's not law yet, but just the House version that passed, Medicaid dollars would not apply to any sort of sex change or gender transition, even for adults, not just for minors, but they couldn't even be used for those procedures for adults. So those are some of the big things. Another thing, the child tax credit has increased. And so if you look at people who specifically focus on this issue of the dropping fertility rate, which is a big problem culturally and economically, and looking at how we can support families and encourage young people to get married and have more children, there is actually a lot of evidence showing that the child tax credit does encourage that. Now, I think there's still a lot more that can be done. And a lot of times people who focus on these kinds of benefits, which is just basically giving parents more money in their pockets when they have a child to use however they want, they argue that this is more effective than policies like subsidized childcare or even paid leave. I think parents should have leave regardless of whether or not it increases the fertility rate. But if we are just looking at some wins, then I think an increased child tax credit definitely is a positive move for families and parents. But let's also talk about the other side. There were some Republicans in the House who opposed it, and it's a big question of whether or not it will still be able to get through the Senate. It's certainly, I think, we can expect some changes again once it goes through the Senate. And the big reason that Republicans who opposed it were opposing it is because it's going to increase the deficit. So that's also been a big thing that the Trump administration has talked about. You know, we've seen the DOGE cuts, some, very painful and seemingly chaotic, but we look at the federal deficit and we look at the trillions and trillions of dollars that America is in debt and say, okay, well, something needs to change. Well, this bill would increase the debt ceiling and increase the deficit over time. So there are cuts to Medicaid, which is something people, again, are concerned about. Allegedly, these Medicaid cuts would apply to waste, fraud, and abuse, so people who are actually able to work or don't technically qualify for Medicaid anyway and are maybe taking advantage of the program. That's what they're saying. That's what the people who would experience the Medicaid cuts. But even with that, it's not enough to offset the cost of everything else. But again, a lot of it was, based in Trump's campaign promises. So we will see. Even Senator Lindsey Graham, as a kind of a preview of how it might go in the Senate now, said some of these cuts are not real. And Representative Thomas Massey from Kentucky said, "We're not arranging deck chairs on the Titanic tonight. We're putting coal in the boiler and setting course for the iceberg." He said, if something is beautiful, you don't do it after midnight. Again, they were up all night debating this. It passed first thing this morning. There was a lot of pressure to get it through quickly. So, again, a mixed bag. Things to celebrate, like Planned Parenthood being defunded, the child tax credit, but also in terms of the deficit, maybe not so great, but we'll see. We'll see what the final version holds. So I did want to turn to something before we get to the bottom of the hour and begin our first interview with Dr. Karl Benzio, who is going to talk with us about Mental Health Awareness Month, which is very important. I did want to just highlight an article that's at pointofview.net that encouraged me because, speaking of the child tax credit, we're talking about how can we encourage young people to build families. And a lot of the problem is that young people have been told to go to college, that they have to have a 4-year degree, then go away. Even think about the encouraging things we say to somebody who maybe we think has a bright future. Oh, you're going to go far. You're going to go places, shoot for the moon. It's never about stay where you are and put down roots. And so you have a generation of people who have done that. They've gotten the 4-year degree. They've gotten thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. They've moved to the big city to start their careers, but salary hasn't kept up with the rate of inflation. Things are expensive, and that's why you have, young adults who aren't able to buy a home. So they're discouraged from getting married and starting families because they don't feel like they have a firm foundation beneath them. But Gen Z, and I know it's easy to look at the younger generations with a negative eye, but there is a trend among Gen Z to kind of push back against that, the rat race, if you will. And so this article in the Free Press details why. So the next generation will maybe start living out this vision that many pronatalists have, that even Vice President J.D. Vance has talked about, of getting married sooner and having children and being more family focused in our policies. And so here's what's happening. You have more young adults realizing that if they leave the big coastal cities like New York, if they leave Los Angeles and they take a job in Perry County, Indiana, they can afford a home, they can get married, they can start their families now, and they can have some land, they can get connected to a local community. Maybe they can even be connected with the friends and the family members that they grew up with and have a really fulfilling life. It's not the vision of success that we're often sold when we're young, which is climbing the ladder and living in a big city, but ultimately it's a more fulfilling life. And a lot of the younger generations are discovering that. There are even organizations that help these kind of middle America cities incentivize young people to move to their cities with moving reimbursements and welcome packages to help them get connected into their local town and revitalize these towns. Now, I just think this is a great trend, and I think it could also impact the polarization that we have, where we are so geographically and politically polarized. But if people become more rooted in their local communities, more rooted in their families, and that can build over generations, then I think you're going to have a much stronger community with the kind of connection and ties that we have that also benefit our mental health. And we will be talking about mental health with Dr. Karl Benzio after this break, so don't go anywhere. It's going to be an important interview.
It was not that long ago that censorship appeared to be almost inevitable. Free speech was being attacked and strangled in many places. And some of us wondered if this was the end. But now, many feel a new sense of hope, a chance for a fresh dawn. Let me caution you, now is not the time to relax. It's a time to press forward, to use this fresh opportunity to proclaim and learn how to apply truth to current issues. By the fact you're here, listening right now, that tells me that you recognize the vital role Point of View plays as a voice of truth. For more than 50 years, we've informed and equipped people who have made a real difference. And when you give to Point of View today, you breathe life into what can be a new golden era for the truth. Please, take a moment right now and invest in truth. Visit pointofview.net or give it 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net. Click in now or call 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, your guest host for Point of View.
Welcome back to Point of View. On the line with me now is Dr. Karl Benzio, a leading voice for American Association of Christian Counselors. May, if you didn't know, is Mental Health Awareness Month. And even though May is almost over, this is such an important topic and one that we as Christians need to be well versed in. So I'm really glad that you could join Point of View today. Thanks for being here, Dr. Benzio.
Oh, great to be with you today.
So let me introduce you to our audience a little bit more. Dr. Benzio is a board-certified psychiatrist specializing in decision-making science. He has dedicated his career to helping individuals renew their minds by integrating biblical truth with clinical psychology. He co-founded Honey Lake Clinic, one of the nation's premier Christian residential treatment centers, and currently serves as chief psychiatric officer at Honey Lake and medical director at the American Association of Christian Counselors. So, Dr. Benzio, obviously this is your mission and your expertise here. And I think that a lot of us probably aren't aware of how prevalent mental health struggles are in America right now for so many people. So could you give us an overview of the landscape?
Yeah, so behavioral health in our country was having a significant struggle for a number of years. After 2000, we had significant overdose deaths just continued to escalate. The opioid epidemic with fentanyl and suicides were increasing. In our society, there was a lot of conflict. We're in this postmodern world that pits person against person. There's a lot of aggression, a lot of violence, bullying, so many violent acts going on. And now we're on our social media, so we can see all these things happening, almost every 5 seconds, every 10 seconds, if you're scrolling through your social media. Whereas back 50 years ago, when I was a kid, you only saw it on the 6 o'clock news. So seeing all this distress in our society and not being as connected because it's, you have a lot of friends on Facebook, but we're a lot more alone time. The Surgeon General just last year said that we're in a loneliness epidemic.
Yeah.
So all that was leading up to COVID, and then COVID just turned a behavioral health epidemic into a disaster. Now, the nice thing about COVID is that because it was affected everybody in some way, there was some sense of loss, disruption in their life, whether it was education, whether it was job, finances, health, or even losing loved ones. Everybody was affected, and it almost gave permission for people to seek out treatment, to raise their hand and say, hey, look, I'm struggling. I need some help. Mm-hmm. And so just in 1 year, 20% of people will have a significant mental health issue. 30% in their lifetime will have an anxiety disorder needing treatment. 25 to 30% will have a significant depression or bipolar disorder in their lifetime. And 15% will experience an addiction to chemicals. And that about 15% will have other significant process addictions like gambling, shopping, love, sex addictions. And that's not even including pornography or caffeine, which are the two most common process addiction or substance addiction. So our society is really struggling. We're trying to figure out, well, how do we deliver more care? And this is sort of where the American Association of Christian Counselors jumps in to train therapists to how to integrate good biblical principles, to be Jesus-centered, Bible-based in their ability to provide good, excellent psychotherapy and treatment to people that are struggling.
Wow. Yeah, that I think that there's a lot of things that you mentioned that people can relate to. And you certainly list, so many factors about our world today, I think, exacerbate these issues for us. So I did want to ask about one kind of current issue. So I do host a separate podcast that is geared toward young people. So I kind of look at some of the trends among Gen Z and those younger even. And one of the big things, in addition to social media now, that people are turning to is artificial intelligence. And a lot of young people who are likely to struggle with mental health issues are turning to AI chatbots as a sort of therapist. And so the American Association of Christian Counselors, AACC, is there to provide real help for people. But do you have kind of thoughts or reactions to this new trend we're seeing? Because I'd love to get your insight on that.
Boy, that is so powerful, and you're just right on target. I just did an interview a couple months ago about a virtual reality situation where a lady in Asia had lost her, I think it was an 8-year-old daughter. And through virtual reality, she was able to put on goggles and then interact with her 8-year-old daughter and hear her 8-year-old daughter's voice. And, they were asking, is this something that's helpful for her? And, it might seem like a good short-term fix, but it doesn't allow that person to really sense that this is a loss, and it's a permanent loss, and they can go back and access. And does that person still stay in our heart in some way? And there's certain memories, yes, but virtual reality or augmented reality sometimes I think do a disservice in starting to live in a fictional world or a fantasized world and not really understand your true identity or what reality really is that God has us in, that we're to live in. And so artificial intelligence is another danger of that, as people are sort of interacting with something that can maybe simulate a conversation or simulate feedback or expertise, but there is no spirit involved in it. No matter how you build it, there is no spiritual aspect to an AI bot. And so they might have all the clinical expertise possible, but there's something about an interaction between two people, between me as a Christian and a Christian patient, that there's a spiritual element. There's me being guided by the Holy Spirit, me having understanding empowered by the Holy Spirit, to being able to call upon Scripture in that situation, and again, having the Holy Spirit's guidance that a bot just will never, ever have. There's an opportunity for me to connect with that other person sort of spiritually through that, this supernatural spiritual world that, I think that we're starting to understand a little bit more through string theory and quantum physics. There might be, an actual physical connection spiritually, as God is very meticulous and very particular how He's designed the world and the world to function. So as you pray for people, or as a twin sort of knows that something's happening with their twin a couple thousand miles away, there's a certain connection that occurs that you just can't build in AI. And so having that spiritual discernment or that spiritual connection, you might be able to get some expertise, but AI, we call it in our psychiatry world, AI, and they use this term in the AI world, hallucinates. It can make things up, or it can infer things that aren't really there just to fit the model or the goal that they've been programmed to attain. And so there's that danger of it even hallucinating in the process and inserting information or assuming information that's not really there, because it's been designed for a certain goal and wants to fulfill that goal above all other goals, so to speak.
Yeah. Wow. I love your insight on that. And just go back to the core of how we were created. We were created as spiritual beings first, in God's image. And so I think that is helpful for people listening. You may come across that question with your kids or a friend of, this is helping me. And it may be hard to articulate why not, even if deep down we know something's off with that. So thank you for explaining that for us. We're about to go to the break in a couple of minutes, and then we'll be back with you, Dr. Benzio. But just as kind of an overview or a teaser before we get into the break, how do you just kind of integrate biblical truth with your mental health treatment? What are the big ways that you do that?
Yeah, so we're called integrationist, right? Trying to bring that clinical expertise of how God designed our mind and marry it to biblical truth. So that's the biblical truths that are sort of pushing into our decision making. And so our decision making affects our brain chemistry. It, guard your heart with all vigilance, because out of it flows the wellspring of life, or the matters of life, or the direction of our life. And we all have a belief system. And whether you're an atheist or you're a Christian, you have a belief system. And God has designed our psychological processes in such a way that whenever our beliefs guide our decisions, when we have beliefs that are in agreement with biblical truths, then our decisions are healthy ones and lead to flourishing, lead to the abundant life, the sanctification process, maturity, the obedient mind, the righteous mind, the chemically balanced brain. We have scientific vocabulary and biblical vocabulary, but they mean the same thing. But whenever a person isn't using biblical truths as their belief system, and we all have an intellectual belief system where, like at the Last Supper, Peter was told, "You're going to deny me 3 times before the cock crows." And he goes, "I'd never do that. In fact, I'd lay down my life for you before I did anything like that." And that was his intellectual belief. But in reality, his actual belief system, a few hours later, he totally chokes.
Right. More after this break with Dr. Benzio.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back. We're interviewing Dr. Karl Benzio on Mental Health Awareness Month. And Dr. Benzio, I want to go back to something you were saying before the break, because you are highlighting such an important truth, which is the creator of our minds. He gave us so much wisdom in the Bible about how to protect them and how we can thrive. And it's just so amazing to see so often that science and medical research actually backs up a lot of the wisdom that the Bible gave us. And so you were talking about this difference between intellectual knowledge, and then a true understanding, and using the story from the Bible of Peter denying Jesus. So go ahead and pick that back up and explain that for us.
Yeah, so a few hours later, after Peter said, "I'll never deny you. I'll lay down my life for you," Peter totally does the exact opposite. He even though he understood what the right answer was, his ability to execute it wasn't very good. And so we all have situations like that where we have knowledge in our head, we have our intellectual theology, I call it, but because of some baggage inside, because of some misinformation, we're not able to pull the trigger on what that right answer is, whether it's fear, whether it's concern for pain, whether it's pursuing pleasures in a hedonistic, fleshly way, or just being lazy or conserving energy, we call it, taking shortcuts. It's amazing how what seems like the right answer all of a sudden seems wrong and the wrong answer seems right. It's sort of the Romans 7 passage, the good things I want to do, I don't, and the bad things I don't want to do, I do. Woe be me, wretched man that I am. So we all have this unconscious space deep inside us that is filled with a lot of information. When Lazarus was raised from the dead, the next thing Jesus said to the people next to him is, "Hey, unbind him." And why? Well, it's because Lazarus had death wrappings around his face, around his body that interfered with his sight, his perspective, his view, interfered with his walk, his movement, his freedom. He didn't tell Lazarus to unbind himself. He told others to help unbind him. You see, Lazarus, just like us, we come, into this world spiritually dead, and through our encounter with Jesus, we become spiritually alive. And our sin slate is washed clean, but our memory banks aren't. Nobody gets a brain transplant. And so we all have this baggage, the psychological baggage, these death wrappings that we need unbinding from. And as we go through that therapy process, some overtly with an actual therapist, and some, trying to navigate through life on their own with various different people coming into their lives and helping guide them in that process of maturity and sanctification. But we need help in that, and we're trying to purge the misinformation. I figure as a kid, we believe in Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, and the Tooth Fairy. And so Satan says, wow, if they believe in those things, I got a lot of other lies I want to sort of store into their database. And so we have a lot of misinformation in that unconscious space. And in the church and in our society at large, we don't do a very good job of helping people understand that they have this huge, vast warehouse of files in their brain, and it stores a lot of information. Some of that information is very accurate information, but unfortunately, some of that information is inaccurate information. And we want to identify it and purge that information, but we then want to replace it not with other lies, but with the truth. That's where biblical truth. So peace, joy, freedom, forgiveness, service, relationship with God, spending time with God, wise pain in our life, adversity, how to navigate adversity. We know there's going to be trials and tribulations, but we have peace. We have the ability to live as conquerors even through that adversity. So those are the truths that we want to replace some of that misinformation as we're identifying and purging that misinformation. As we do that, oh my gosh, our ability to make good, healthy decisions in a consistent fashion is incredible. And that's where that sanctification or transformation process really exponentially speeds up.
Yeah. Wow. I love the way you framed that of just that we all have multiple files in our brain full of information. And I think there is, I know that there is it can be a big stigma kind of against seeking therapy or counseling, especially sometimes even in churches and in Christian circles. But this is so important to take care of our minds and steward them well. So how can Christians help get rid of that stigma and encourage people to seek the help they need?
I think the first thing is Jesus is perfect, right? And if he's a 100 on a scale of 0 to 100, all the rest of us are like between 0 and 1. So we often think that we're like, I'm pretty good. I'm at like an 80, or I'm at 85, or maybe I'm a 60. But that's pretty, prideful or arrogant. Compared to Jesus as perfection, we're really between 0 and 1. So we all need help, just like Lazarus. We all have death wrappings. We all have psychological baggage that we're dealing with and we're trying to navigate. And it's always amazing, sort of to me, how we have a dentist, we have a landscaper, we have an electrician, we have an accountant to do our taxes. So we have, for these external things in our life, it's amazing how we get coaching and we get expertise to come in and help us in those areas. But in this internal world that we have psychologically and spiritually, It's amazing how we don't really allow people access to that space, where we don't seek out help and coaching and how to, whether it's our marriage, whether it's parenting, whether it's our self-esteem, whether it's dealing with past loss or grief, or either abuses that were perpetrated on me or abuses that I perpetrated on others, and mistakes that I made and harm that I present to others. We don't do a very good job of reaching out for that. A lot of times we think that spending time with God is what we need, and that's certainly important, and we need that relationship with God through Jesus and the Holy Spirit guiding us. But to be able to, God said when He made Adam, it's not good that he's alone. And as I said with Lazarus, He built us for relationship, for other people to help us unbind, and for us to help others unbind. So we need to be engaging with others, but engaging with each other in sort of a more open, transparent, vulnerable way. We don't want to pick people that are just yes people in our lives, or people that we don't feel comfortable sharing information with. We want to share information with them appropriately, so they can understand who we are and give us expertise and give us some guidance in how to manage life a little bit more healthfully as we go about the daily decisions that we have to make.
Yes. Oh, so good. And unfortunately, we're almost out of time already. But if you've been listening to this interview and you think there is somebody that you would like to connect with some biblically based counseling, or maybe you need some help and you recognize that and say, I need somebody to help me sort through those mental files and speak biblical truth into my life, and somebody who is certified to do that, you can go to aacc.net. And that's the website for the American Association of Christian Counselors. And I just looked up the website, and there's a tab right here that says Find a Counselor. So I encourage people to check that out. And you can also, if you forget that, go to pointofview.net. We have the link under today's show webpage. So Dr. Benzio, again, I just thank you for joining Point of View today.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for what you do. And for listeners out there, know that you're not alone. Everybody struggles in some way, and to seek help, it doesn't matter what other people think. As long as you're moving forward, as long as you're growing, access the resources that God's put available for you, moving in a forward direction.
Great. Yes. Wonderful advice. So that's Dr. Karl Benzio. And again, go to pointofview.net to find the link for his website, or go to aacc.net. And prioritize mental health. Well, we're about to go to a break, and at the top of the next hour, we're going to jump right into another interview that I'm very excited about with Jake Weidmann. He's the youngest certified Master Penman in the world and is one of only 9 in the world. He's an acclaimed painter, woodworker, and fine artist, and he does such a good job articulating why artistry and beauty matters for Christians and how it can be a witness in our world. This is going to be a fun interview. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back after this break.
Many years ago, they began saying that we live in the information age. Well, today there is so much information coming at us from every direction. The hardest thing is to discern which issues are really important and how can I make a positive impact without wasting my time trying to figure out accurate information. Let me give you a suggestion to help with that. Visit pointofview.net, look at the tabs across the top, find the one named Viewpoints. Kirby Anderson and others on our team are constantly watching for news to identify those issues that you really need to know about. They boil things down in a brief summary, and then you can decide if it's something on which you want to learn more and get involved. Again, when you go to pointofview.net, click on Viewpoints, you'll see exactly what I mean. You'll see the issues that we are covering right now. And when you like what you see, I honestly think you will, you can slide on over, enter your email, and get them automatically sent to your inbox each day. That's it. Take a minute now, be informed. Pointofview.net, click on Viewpoints. Point of View will continue after this.
Thank you, Kirby. I really appreciate your program. You cover a lot of issues that a lot of us think about, I'm sure. And this is the first time I've ever called in, so I appreciate your input, too.
Oh, I thank God for what you're doing on Point of View. You guys have more influence across this country than I believe any of them in terms of tackling the issues and getting the truth out to Americans. It's getting to the point where truth just is bottled up on every hand. Every time you turn around, there's another big bottleneck against truth. I hope your listeners realize what Point of View is doing and supports Point of View in every possible way you can.
You know, I can't go to Washington. I can't do those things, so the only way that I can help is the way that God has provided for me, and to give some of that back to you guys. So, like you said, partnering with Point of View, because, you know, you can't do it alone. Thank you very much for what you guys do. Believe me, it's a needed thing, and I just hope everybody certainly would get on the bandwagon with you.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, your guest host for Point of View.
Welcome back. I'm Liberty McArtor, sitting in for Kirby Anderson today, and it's great to be with you. Right now, we are going to interview Jake Weidmann. I am so excited. He has written the book Old Soul, New Creation, Experiencing God Through a Life of Art and Faith. I'm holding it up if you're watching online. It's just a gorgeous book. Jake is the youngest certified Master Penman in the world, as well as one of only 9 in the world, an acclaimed painter, woodworker, and fine artist. And his book features 10 of his most renowned works, along with in-progress photographs and stories of the artistic and spiritual struggle behind each one. And Jake, I love what's on the back cover here. God is already creating in you. How will you join him in this artistry? Whether you prefer a pen, a paintbrush, or an iPad, every creative endeavor you undertake is a testimony to how God created you to create. So this is just, again, a beautiful book. I've loved reading through it. But can you give us a little more insight into what inspired you to write this, not only to tell us your story, but really give us a strong argument for why creation matters for us as humans?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, it has become something of my life's message that we were all created to create. You may not be artistic, but that does not mean that you are not creative. And so the same creative capacity that is alive in me whenever I put pen to vellum, brush to canvas, or chisel to wood is alive in you. Whenever you're, even balancing a balance sheet, or building a business, or forming a home, raising children, that same creative capacity that God has given us is alive in you. And so that was the real desire to write this book, is to not only, chronicle the different ways that God has worked through me and in me in such intimate ways whenever I create with him, but also to inspire others to do the same. That I think we tend to fall into consumerism in this day and age, but I think it's very important that we lean into our creativity and learn to create, and in so doing, draw into a deeper relationship with God. Yeah. So well said. And I do want to talk about just the spiritual benefit of creation, but let's talk a little bit about your story. First, you talk about, how for a long time, even though probably to the outside observer, it was clear that you were an artist, even from the time you were a child, you hesitated to claim that title or vocation. Why is that? Yeah, actually, in the opening of my book, I kind of, that's what I say is, just as C.S. Lewis called himself the most reluctant convert, I refer to myself as the most reluctant creative. Because even though my talent was, apparent ever since I was a little kid, my parents knew that I would always be hid away somewhere drawing or coloring. I always had this artistic gift, but always denied it at the same time. I always thought, it was never going to be the thing that I would do full time. I was never going to make a living from it. And so all the while, for a good portion of my life, just denied the power of the gift that God had put in me. And so, the first, even the first, there's many almost like liturgical prayers that I include in the book, and the first is a prayer of repentance, and because there is a repenting that I had to do when I actually came to this realization that that this was what God had for me, and I can push it off, I can deny it for only so long, and then God really got a hold of me through my art, and so I couldn't deny it any longer, and so that's when I finally made the leap of faith to become a full-time professional artist.
Yeah, I think that's so encouraging, especially for people who may be listening, because I think in our day and age, we tend to think that art or our creative side is more of a hobby or a luxury. There are
Right.
urgent things we need to focus on as Christians. But you really countered that. I think your whole book counters that this is a worthwhile endeavor and it's important for Christians to be involved in the arts, isn't it?
Yeah. I really believe that it is, that we need to, that it is a part of the imago Dei, the image of God that is pressed in us, just as God is the ultimate creator. And it's not that he finished his creation on day 6 and rested on day 7, and hung up his apron at that time. He's creating all the time, and especially within us. And that's really what spawned the title of the book is, on the one hand, it speaks to the nature of my work. I have this love for the old world, for ancient art forms and lasting truths. But I want to put those lasting truths into the form of a new creation, even using some of those old disciplines. But the other thing that it speaks to is that this old soul is made a new creation as God is always working in me, reforming my heart, transforming me more into the likeness of his Son every day whenever I step into that creative capacity. And so I found, even as I love to go to church and I love to, worship in the setting of fellowship in a congregation, or I love to go on hikes. I live out in Colorado, and so I love to hike in the mountains and see God's glory there. But in some of the most profound and intimate ways, God shows up when I'm creating with him, when I'm just leaning in and reliant on him as I'm in my creative flow. It's like there God shows up in the most subtle, but also the most profound ways. And it's something that I want everyone to be able to experience. And I believe that they can in whatever capacity it is that they create.
Yeah, I love it. If you are just joining us, we're talking with Jake Weidmann. He has written a book called Old Soul, New Creation. Get it for the artist in your life, whether they are painting, woodworking, if they are a storyteller, whatever form of art. This is going to be such an encouragement. We're about to go to the break, but Jake, what you said reminded me of the quote that's famous from Eric Liddell, the famous Olympic runner, who said, "When I run, I feel God's pleasure." And I feel like what you're articulating is that God gives us these gifts and things that we were made to do, and we really glorify him and also connect with him in a very unique way when we tap into that and when we press into that. And your book is such an encouragement for us to do that. So stay right where you are. We're about to go to a break, but when we come back, we'll be talking with Jake some more. But in the meantime, go to pointofview.net, follow along with all of the topics that we're discussing, and you won't want to miss. If you missed anything we discussed previously, you can click on those links as well and stay up to date with everything on the show today. But we'll be right back after this break.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Christopher Caldwell explains how DEI destroyed itself. He wonders why more Americans haven't risen up in rebellion against the Trump administration's assault on affirmative action. The reason is simple. The American people have seen what happens when civil rights concepts are pushed to the extreme. They didn't like how the idea of diversity, equity, and inclusion were used against them and the country. In his book On the Age of Entitlement, Christopher Caldwell documents how the civil rights movement had significant unintended consequences. One was the establishment of an explicit system of racial preferences. Americans may not have liked the fact that certain races were given preferences over others, but chose not to challenge many of those excesses except in an occasional court case. Then came the summer of 2020. While Americans were locked in their houses during COVID, race-conscious youth engaged over the death of George Floyd in police custody set several U.S. cities on fire. He adds that Americans got a taste of living in the Soviet Union. Your life could be destroyed, your career derailed, if your support for George Floyd was less than total. Even celebrities were not immune. New Orleans Saint quarterback Drew Brees had to apologize for his support of the American flag. OSU football coach Mike Gundry apologized for wearing a T-shirt with the name of a conservative television network on it. Then President Biden took office promising to make DEI hardline. The stage was set for Trump to come into office and issue executive orders against DEI, affirmative action, and other such policies. Politicians and bureaucrats pushed these policies too far, and DEI destroyed itself. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free booklet on a biblical view of Patriot Preachers, go to viewpoints.info/Patriot Preachers. Viewpoints.info/Patriot Preachers. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. I'm interviewing Jake Weidmann. He has a book that's just been released, Old Soul, New Creation. And it is beautiful. And it's so fun to look through just because there are these gorgeous pictures of several of your most renowned works, Jake. And one of the things I loved was reading your approach to these different pieces and how much thought went in to the symbolism, down to the type of wood that you wanted to use, whether you wanted to use vellum or parchment, and how you connected that to scripture in your pieces and just the deep knowledge of the Bible that went into that. And I think that's something that in our modern churches probably don't really think as much about, is this, physical and artistic symbolism. But can you talk about why that sense of intentionality is so important for you when you create?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, having the message central to the art piece is paramount to my work. That when I create, it is never art for art's sake. It's always meant to point to something higher than the art itself. And so for me, that's, I think it reaches its pinnacle whenever it's put in that place as a mode of worship to God. And that's where I believe it was art's original intent. It even says in Exodus that God called Bezalel an artist and a craftsman of all kinds to create the tabernacle, to essentially set the scene for God's dwelling place and his communion place among his people. And so for me, it's like I want to tap into that original power. I want to make sure that I'm meeting that original intention. And so So I'm always, diving deep into the symbolism and the message that is carried throughout the work. And, sometimes it's more in that middle space of common grace where it's just getting to bask over the beauty of a different bird in some of my Flourished Bird series, or it might be more overt in like my hymn series, for instance, which has been just one of the most fun and rewarding series to do. Because as a master penman, being able to write down some of these old classic hymns and incorporate, elements of their backstory, but also the deep theology that is woven into their lyrics is just such a fun, amazing and rewarding artistic endeavor to do.
Yeah. And those were just like, I had tears in my eyes looking at the pictures and reading about how you approached each of those, the ones that are featured in the book. Like, it's so beautiful. But I mean, you talk about how the process of creating brings you closer to God, and how you've learned, your book really, goes into different spiritual lessons and kind of things that were going on in your life at the time you're working on a certain piece, and how God was speaking to you through the artwork. And
right.
But it also, a point that you make is that in addition to just being a form of worship, when we create, that's also a way for us to actually get connected with our community, and it's a form of communication with others where we can really be a witness in that way. So can you talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, art has always been that form of universal language. Unfortunately, through the movements of modernism and postmodernism, it was really turned to gibberish. But I want that as well to be brought back to something that draws us together rather than pulls us apart. Because a lot of the approach of modern art kind of says, it's so abstracted, it's so unintentional in the meaning that is put into it. It essentially says to the viewer, make of it what you will. And there's no right or wrong answer, which sort of goes along with this modern idea of relativistic pluralism. And in the end, I think that as much as it tries to reach everybody, it doesn't create a sense of community. It actually drives people apart. Because if there's not a unifying idea that draws us together, and one person sees one thing and somebody else sees another, then there's no point of relationship. There's nothing that brings us together. And so for me, I found, representing art in a way that has this deep, explicit message that we can all resonate with actually draws us together as a community of people and a community of believers, and even points to the great cloud of witnesses that surround us, because it even, a lot of what I do is drawn from ancient practices. So it highlights the fact that it's like, what I create in my work is not only beautiful today and promises to be beautiful tomorrow, but has been beautiful for ages and ages past. And so in that way, it just it creates a beautiful connection for people to come together. And so it reframed my whole thinking on art as a true bid for connection and an avenue for relationship.
Yeah, and that's so well said, because what we want to do is establish a biblical worldview, hopefully, in the way that we think about current events and issues, but even in the way we think about art, how there is intentionality, there is truth, there is a message. It's not just, whatever you think. And God was so intentional in creating the world, and we can be intentional in how we create and even appreciate art. But I did want to get your take on this. We live in such a hurried world, and I think we as Christians can feel that pressure of, this is happening over here and this is happening here, and there's so much at stake, and I've got to, look at this and this and this, and we just go, and we get swept up in that hurry. And good art really takes time, though. So what is that something that Christians should reclaim, I guess, in this age of hurry, just learning how to take our time a little bit more, including with how we create art?
Yeah, absolutely. My wife and I kind of we work together in this art business, and a common phrase we use is that we are building cathedrals in a pop tent world. That we are desiring to make something that will last through time and will always point others towards God. But that's hard to do when you live in this world of instant gratification, and it's hard to get people to even comprehend the amount of time something takes. But time is actually a critical element to the success, to the longevity of the work. And this is long known. John Ruskin, he was a Victorian art critic, and he said, "That which is quickly made will quickly fade. But that which is that takes the most amount of time to do is surely to last and endure for the ages." And so that's a good reminder to me as I'm working on a current art piece that'll be 2 years in the making when it is all said and done. But all of that time is not spent but invested in something that is going to last. And so that is important. And I think, we see this even mimicked in our Father, that he is in no rush. Just as I am in no rush to make bad art, he is in no rush to hurry along the development of our souls, that he's in it for the long haul. And so patiently, he waits and works with us.
Yes.
So I think it is a powerful message in this day and age, and one that we deeply need.
Yeah. Well, Jake, this is so fun to talk about. We're about out of time, but I just want to thank you again for joining Point of View. And then I encourage listeners to go to pointofview.net. You can find a link to Jake's website and a link to get his book, Old Soul, New Creation. I definitely recommend it. So, Jake, thanks for joining Point of View today.
Thank you, Liberty. It was a pleasure being with you.
Yeah, such a great conversation. Any artists in your life, or if you want to tap more into your own creativity and use that for the glory of God, Jake's book is such an encouragement. But even though we're about to go to a break, we're not done. We have more to talk about. And so let's talk about some of the issues that have been highlighted on the show so far, including mental health, how we can stay connected, how we can build healthier habits and reflect a biblical worldview in our lives. Lots more to discuss when we come back from this break on Point of View.
It almost seems like we live in a different world from many people in positions of authority. They say men can be women and women men. People are prosecuted differently or not at all, depending on their politics. Criminals are more valued and rewarded than law-abiding citizens. It's so overwhelming, so demoralizing. You feel like giving up. But we can't. We shouldn't. We must not. As Winston Churchill said to Britain in the darkest days of World War II, never give in, never give in, never, 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 never yield to force, never yield to the apparently overwhelming might of the enemy. And that's what we say to you today. This is not a time to give in, but to step up and join Point of View in providing clarity in the chaos. We can't do it alone, but together, with God's help, we will overcome the darkness. Invest in biblical clarity today at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, your guest host for Point of View.
Welcome back to Point of View. It's Liberty McArtor. I'm sitting in for Kirby today, and it has been such a great show so far. Always an honor to be with you. Just a couple of housekeeping things. Tomorrow, Penna will be hosting the weekend edition, and she'll be joined by Kelly Shackelford and Dr. Merrill Matthews. So be sure to tune into that. And if you want to take action, that's something that we want to encourage you to do at Point of View, is to get involved, to make a difference. And so you can go to pointofview.net and always scroll down and look at what we have under the Take Action tab. Right now, there is actually a bill that's going to Congress where you can contact your senators and encourage them to defend a piece of legislation that will really bolster parental rights protections. So obviously that's a super important issue, but we have seen it challenged. We have seen parents' right to have a say in their children's education, their health care, for instance, to know when maybe they've been encouraged to undergo some sort of gender transition at public school and the parents haven't been told about it. That has happened. Or issues with homeschooling, school choice. Parents have the right to decide what their children will be involved in that regard. And so this bill protects that. You can easily fill out the form and it sends a message to your senator. So go to pointofview.net and take action. But let's talk about our connections. I feel like that has been a theme that has come up throughout the show today in the last hour. If you didn't get a chance to listen, which you can always do, you can go back and listen on YouTube or Facebook or pointofview.net. But we interviewed Dr. Karl Benzio, who is with the American Association of Christian Counselors, talking about mental health. And he discussed how there had been a trend really from the year 2000, and there were a lot of factors going into it, but it included us becoming more isolated as a society. Obviously, social media and devices that promise to connect us more seem to be having the opposite effect, with people having fewer close ties and real life physical community and relationships. And all of that led up to a year or two ago, the U.S. Surgeon General saying that we had a loneliness epidemic in the United States. And so again, Dr. Benzio gave some great advice on how to get connected with help, biblical-based help for mental health struggles. So go to pointofview.net and click on that link. But let's kind of talk about that connection aspect, because when you have mental health professionals, Christian and non-Christian, when you have the government, the U.S. Surgeon General declaring a loneliness epidemic and talking about the importance of community, it seems like we are all in agreement across the board that, okay, this is a problem. Being quote unquote connected online with lots of friends or followers on social media is not the same as having connections in real life. But you are going to run across some arguments to the contrary. And so I actually wanted to highlight one of them just because I think this is so important for us to articulate. And even as I touched on just a little bit in the first hour, even as you see Gen Z kind of reject the big cities, the ladder climbing corporate lifestyle in favor of smaller towns and more familial connections, I think that's a really positive trend and relates to this. But you are still going to see people pushing back against it. So this was an argument or an article in the Free Press by an economist and popular columnist in the U.S., Tyler Cowen. He says the title of his article is "Why I Often Choose My Phone Instead of Flesh and Blood." And he says, "I believe spending time online, I will meet and befriend a collection of individuals around the world who are pretty much exactly the people I want to be in touch with. And I will be in touch with them regularly. I call them the perfect people for me. I recognize that many of these communities are online, and thus they are thinner than many more local face-to-face relationships. But," he goes on to say, "if forced to choose, I would rather have thinner relationships with the perfect people for me than regular bear hugs and beer guzzlings with the people who are in the 87th percentile for me. He even says that he doesn't find his online life depressing, even though he acknowledges that, that is an issue. And as we discussed with Dr. Benzio, it's kind of a big issue. A lot of people are facing mental health struggles. But he says even if online life did depress him a little bit, it would be worth it because these connections are more interesting. He talks about, how he and his wife both often choose to commune with their online communities and, text them or chat with them or be on social media spaces with them when they're in the same room at night because they find their online lives more interesting than their in-person lives. And he thinks that that's okay because we get the choice to really cultivate, online connections more so than if we are just connected with the people around us physically. So how do we think of this? I think this is something that we need to be able to really talk about and articulate because especially for young people, how do you say, no, I don't want you to get social media, or I don't want you to be spending as much time on your phone. I want you to come out here and spend, more time with the people around you. There are a lot of movements to prevent or for parents to kind of agree that they will keep their kids off of smartphones and social media for a certain amount of time because the peer pressure to be online and to be on these devices is so strong. And there are so many concerns for young people, safety concerns, but even just from kind of the community aspect, you're probably going to have those people in your life, those kids who come to you and say, well, my friend's on social media and they get to text all the time. They're connected more than I am. And I can connect with people around the world and find people who are similar to me or have similar interests in me. And why is that not more valuable than just hanging out with people that I happen to live nearby? So this is why we need to be able to think about this. So from a Christian perspective, I don't think we're supposed to siphon ourselves off into groups of the perfect people for us because relationship is supposed to be sacrificial. And that's also what makes it rewarding. So when you're online and you have these online communities, you can pop in for fun and entertainment when you feel like it, and then you can dip out. If it gets controversial or you get bored, you can just leave. But there's no real tie there. And something that I actually just talked about on the Know Why podcast, which I host, and you can find at knowwhypodcast.com, is that people are more fulfilled when we feel needed. And an online community just doesn't need you the same way that your neighbor needs you, or that your family member needs you, or the student sitting beside you in class might need you. And that's what leads to our fulfillment. And it goes back to the Bible story, right? The religious leaders asking Jesus, who is my neighbor? And we know the story of the Great Samaritan, and that's the story that Jesus gave an answer. And Jews and Samaritans didn't get along. They weren't the perfect people for each other culturally in that context. And yet Jesus told a story of connection there to demonstrate how the attitude we should have when it comes to community. So I don't think that means we can't find like-minded people or even enjoy online communities. If you're passionate about a certain hobby and you're able to connect with other people online to discuss that hobby or learn about it, then that's fine. But it gets to a problem in our society that we are seeing more and more of people choosing that life and even feeling this. There's this been documented where young people who spend more time online than offline often feel like this online world that they exist in is more real than reality, is more real than the physical world. So we posted an article at pointofview.net, actually from Ross Douthat at the New York Times, where I think he gives a really strong counter argument. But he talks about how in the age of AI, these issues are going to be exacerbated even more. And so it is going to take intentionality to really push back against that. He also makes a point, that I think I agree with. I think Tyler Cowen, who wrote, about choosing his phone instead of flesh and blood, I think there's a little bit of privilege there, but you may be able to find some niche subcultures online, but the average person is just kind of surfing and sucked into that algorithm, and they're not finding quality community online. And so Ross says, we have to make the choice to have the child practice their religion, found the school, support the local theater, museum, opera, or concert hall, even if you can see it all on YouTube. And that ties in with what we were talking with Jake about, right? The value of creating and how that is also a communal act. And it's a way that we can connect with our community. And in this day and age, as Christians, we're going to have to take the lead on that. We're going to have to be so intentional about doing that, because that is where we really can reflect Christ to others. More when we get back from this break.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. A few minutes left in the show today, and I did want to touch on another piece of news that I didn't have time to get to in the first hour. This is something that you may have heard of already, but over the weekend, I did want to acknowledge that former President Joe Biden announced that he had been diagnosed with an aggressive form of prostate cancer that has spread to his bones. Obviously, this is really sad news for the Biden family, so I don't want to politicize it, but I just wanted to mention it as something to be, lifting the Biden family up in prayer. And so it was probably no surprise that there are some health issues that have been going on for a while with the former president. A lot of times this kind of stuff can go undetected for a long time and then be very serious very quickly. So it's a reminder to keep his family in your prayers, to also pray for our leaders. The Bible says that we need to be praying for our leaders. And so we want to pray for our current president and others at the state and local and federal levels for health and safety and protection and wisdom as well as they carry out their jobs. But I want to also come back for the last few seconds or last few minutes of this segment to what we were talking about a few moments ago, which is the importance of connection. And so, again, we talked about this a little bit even with Jake. We were focused in that interview on artwork and how art is not a luxury or a hobby or a pastime, but something that is actually very important because we were made in the image of God and we were made as creators. But oftentimes talking about, something like that maybe feels irresponsible because there are so many things happening. There are so many things happening around the world, in politics, and at Point of View, we are always encouraging you to be aware, be informed, be engaged, be equipped to make a difference. For instance, by taking action with the action alerts that we have at pointofview.net for you to do. And so is it then kind of antithetical to that to say, okay, well, let's talk about connection. Let's talk about community. Let's talk about slowing down and taking time. And I'm going to say no. I actually think those two are dependent upon each other. If we want to make a better difference in our society, then you got to look at the root issue, right? Because yes, policies matter, politics matter, and who we elect matters, but that can only change so much of culture. If the culture isn't changing, then those changes that might happen in Congress or a bill that might be signed or an executive order might be signed is not really going to make a truly lasting impact if the culture doesn't change. And you do that by changing hearts and changing minds and by building stronger, happier, healthier communities that are more connected. There is so much ripple effect when you have a breakdown in connection, when you aren't connected with a healthy community. And so I don't think it's any surprise that we're seeing so many problems politically and otherwise when we have a culture that is lonely, disconnected, largely non-religious, not connected to a sort of faith-based community, which research proves again and again is so good for one's health. So we talked about the importance of in-person community, but let's talk about the elephant in our room, or maybe that device in your pocket right now, which is your smartphone. You probably have one if you're listening. I would wager the vast majority of people listening have one. And it goes everywhere with us, right? I mean, I know that it does for me. And so I posted an article I encourage you to read at pointofview.net from First Things, How I Kicked My Phone Habit. Because if we want to help create healthier communities and encourage more connection, and with our kids and grandkids, encourage them to be connected to the real world, that starts with the man in the mirror, right? So how healthy is our phone habit? So I wanted to leave you with a few practical tips before the end of today. And so again, this is an article written by a member of Gen Z, just another example of hope that I see in the next generation, and a lot of things we can be happy about that young adults are starting to lead the way on. And one of those is healthier habits with technology. So let me know if this sounds familiar. This is from Clement Harold. I decided I wanted a healthier relationship with my smartphone. My phone had become a fixture in every aspect of my life. I kept it on my desk when I worked, in my pocket during meals, beside my bed when I slept. I brought it to the church, to gym, to the bathroom. I realized there was scarcely a moment in my day or night when this tantalizing device wasn't within arm's reach. And then there's so much pressure too, right? There's this, again, I think false sense of urgency, really, that we always have to have it. Because what if we miss a text? What if we miss a call? I was talking with some friends the other day who said, they had texted somebody who put their phone on the do not disturb setting. And so if you text someone and they have that setting on, it'll say so-and-so has their notification silenced. And there's almost an offense taken there when you see that and you're like, oh my goodness, my friend doesn't want to hear from me because their notifications are silenced. And then I think we have to even kind of analyze that a little bit and say, okay, wow, we have created such an expectation that I expect somebody that I text or call or email, they have got to respond to me right now. And we feel that way. So we feel like, oh my gosh, we can't leave our phones anywhere. And I like how he likened it to Bilbo's ring. If you're a Lord of the Rings fan like me, I had begun to treat it like Bilbo's ring as my precious magical object from which I must never be parted and which left me anxiously checking my pockets every time I feared I had misplaced it. Okay, so obviously they're created, social media, these devices are created to be addictive. So just know that you are fighting an uphill battle against these devices because it is literally affecting your brain in ways to make you constantly drawn to these devices. But as Christians, as Harold argues here in this article, it is our job to lead the way as disciples in the 21st century to re-immerse ourselves in the real world of real things and real beauty. It means we have to block out the noise that surrounds us and rediscover that still small voice of the Spirit. That's really hard to do when you're constantly distracted by notifications or looking at a screen or scrolling. So this article has some helpful tips. For instance, you can actually get software to block browsing on your phone. You can get devices that will actually lock certain apps during certain times of the day to just remove that temptation to look at those things. A lot of, I know I do, maybe you don't, but I'll click on Facebook like a million times in a row and not even realize that I'm doing it. It's just such a habit. So you can get stuff that kills that habit by just blocking you from being able to do it. Some of us can't afford to leave social media. We maybe, get certain information or really, necessary connections about, local events and things that are going on. But if you can limit your time on social media or delete certain accounts, you know what? Life is going to go on. The world's going to keep spinning. You don't have to be on Instagram. It's going to continue. And a lot of people who leave social media realize that, oh, wow, I have a lot more mental space than I did before. And so he just gives a lot of practical tips that I would recommend. And again, he leaves us here. Reversing the harmful effects of modern technology begins with our, once again, prizing friendship for the priceless jewel that it is. And until we learn to reinvest in Christian community, our efforts to lead lives of virtue in the modern world will remain stunted. I think that's such a theme that we have seen throughout the show with the topics that we've discussed today and the wonderful guests that I've had the privilege to interview, is that we need to be investing in Christian community. We need to be investing in our community, talking with our neighbors. So that's my challenge to you. That's your take action takeaway today, is to go outside, leave the phone behind for a walk and say hi to somebody in person. And little by little, I think we can make a difference when we decide to do that as Christians. But it's been great being with you today. Thank you to Megan and to Steve for putting the show together. Thank you for listening. And be sure to tune in tomorrow again for the weekend edition, which will be hosted by Penna Dexter. And I'll be with you again next week. See you then.
In 19th century London, two towering historical figures did battle, not with guns and bombs, but words and ideas. London was home to Karl Marx, the father of communism, and legendary Baptist preacher Charles Spurgeon. London was in many ways the center of the world, economically, militarily, and intellectually. Marx sought to destroy religion, the family, and everything the Bible supports. Spurgeon stood against him, warning of socialism's dangers. Spurgeon understood Christianity is not just religious truth, it is truth for all of life. Where do you find men with that kind of wisdom to stand against darkness today? Get the light you need on today's most pressing issues delivered to your inbox when you sign up for the Viewpoints commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Every weekday, in less than 2 minutes, you'll learn how to be a person of light to stand against darkness in our time. It's free, so visit pointofview.net/signup right now. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.